Welcome to Bangalore International Centre, a platform for informed dialogue, arts and culture. BIC Talks, our podcast, brings ideas and conversations ever closer to you.
Welcome to BIC Talks. I'm Pawan Srinath. Over the last 6 weeks, between the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, millions upon millions of migrant workers across India have faced unimaginable challenges, and one that so many of us still know very little about. To help us understand some of these most dire and desperate challenges that the most vulnerable of Indians are facing, we are joined today by Rohini Mohan, Clifton D. Rosario, and Rajendran Narayanan. We recorded this episode on May 5th, Tuesday evening, and this is a constantly evolving situation in Karnataka and across India. Rohini Mohan is an award-winning independent journalist who writes on human rights and politics. Clifton D. Rosario is an advocate and the National Secretary of the All India Central Council of Trade Unions, AICCTU. Rajendran Narayanan is a volunteer with the Standard Workers Action Network, SWAN, and is an assistant professor at Azim Premji University. Rohini will be anchoring the discussion with Clifton and Raj today. Rohini, over to you.
Thanks, Pawan. This has been actually a hard 45 days under lockdown for everyone in the country, but more so for the migrant workers that we've seen across the country walking home in thousands. There's been very hard pictures of governments and policemen beating them, spraying them with disinfectants. We've all looked at a situation that seems completely avoidable, but every one of us has been looking at it helplessly. Today, we are going to talk about what could have been done to change the situation, where the mistakes lay, what actually people who are on the ground, the migrant workers that we talk about as a group, but how individuals on the ground working in cities, in construction, as security guards, as domestic workers, as electricians, carpenters, people in the working class in cities across the country, what they actually were going through. So to talk to us, we have two people who have been working quite closely with this issue. They have been working with labor issues for decades now, but in the past 2 months, they have worked much harder and have had to deal firsthand with many of the issues that we witnessed, most of us witnessed on TV or read in the newspapers. So let me go first to lay the ground of what this situation is like. So India has apparently an estimated 50 crore migrants, and this is about 37% of the Indian population. That's a huge number that became suddenly extremely visible now in the lockdown. They form 29% of the population in Indian cities. Most of them are daily wagers. And the largest number of migrant workers come from UP, 25% of these workers. The second is Bihar, followed by Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. And in the last 2 months, apparently an estimated 2 lakh people have walked home. The numbers are surely much higher. They've walked thousands of kilometers back home. Several have died on the way. Others, once they reached home, have not been allowed into the villages because people are wondering if they have the virus and will infect the rest of the people with COVID-19. Clifton, let me come to you first. You've been working on the field, especially in Karnataka. What were the first few weeks of the lockdown like for migrant workers?
Thanks, Rohini. I guess we've all seen the images. So really, I don't think anyone has been able to escape the kind of trauma that the migrant workers have been through over the past 45 days. The one thing that can really be said about this pandemic is that it took a pandemic of this proportion to actually bring out the social reality of migrant workers. So till today, migrant workers didn't occupy the imagination of either the political imagination for sure, but also I think social imagination of our country. But the moment the lockdown was declared, the images that we saw of thousands and thousands of workers with their families, children, men, women, old people, walking all the way back to their villages I would imagine, the question that it actually should have thrown up, I think, for a lot of us is, why were they running away from these cities? This is, I think, one of the biggest learnings, I think, for most of us, in the sense that the only thing that the city could offer to them was a wage, nothing beyond that. And the moment that was taken away, that became an illusion. They saw no sense in being it, and then they started walking away from the cities. Actually, I feel, one should really dedicate this program to the memory of those workers who have fallen on the roads, who died in this entire process. And I can remember Gangamma, who was a construction worker, a 29-year-old construction worker, who was working in Bangalore. She's from a small village in Sinnur Taluk, in Raichur. Started walking back from Bangalore, and on the way to a village, she fell, she collapsed in Ballari, and she died over there. And the reason I say that is because death is something that we understand quite easily. But the everyday trauma that the migrant workers have been through after that, the assault on their dignity more than anything else, I would imagine that is something that is absolutely unacceptable. And Rohini, actually, I think you used the right word. So something that was absolutely avoidable. Why it wasn't avoided, of course, is a different matter altogether. We can get to that later. But the point is, I think the precarious lives of migrant workers, as it always was, has been made far more precarious by this pandemic and the lockdown. I think people who say disasters do not see caste, disasters don't see class, they affect everyone the same way. I don't think we could be wronger than that. The fact is that this section of the working class, this section of the informal sector has borne the brunt of the lockdown. And I think it's going to take a very, very long time for them to come out of this.
Raj, can you talk about the texture of what Clifton broadly mentioned, the texture of what this precariousness is about, which came out very strongly in the report that the Stranded Workers Action Network did by surveying more than 11,000 migrant workers stranded across India. You did this survey between April 8th and 13th. And there was a sentence in this report, or perhaps the one that came after, that said it's no longer a trade-off between lives and livelihood, but between lives and lives. And that really affected me. And some of the figures that, like more than 90% didn't get rations from the government. We kept hearing of relief packages by the finance ministry that announced that, 1.7 trillion rupees would be given to the poor under the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Yojana, and that 500 rupees will be transferred to the Jan Dhan accounts of the women. We did hear of all of this. And did people get it? What did your survey find?
First of all, I'll just clarify that what we have been doing is actually relief work. And we've been trying to assist people who are stranded in different parts of the country with some basic amount of cash, and also trying to pair them up with a local organization and government facilities to reach them. That's the primary thing. And in the process, we realized that we need to systematically do it. So we started collecting information systematically. And the 2 reports that we've released is actually an outcome of that. So it should not be conflated as a research or as any kind of, so that kind of thing is not there. Now, coming back to, I think Clifton really summarized it perfectly in the sense that it's actually an assault on the dignity of the people, because what we are seeing is that there are people from Bihar, Jharkhand, Bengal, etc., and stranded, let's say, in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. Now, they don't know the language, and their umbilical cord with the city was the contractor. Now that the contractor has shut his phone away, it's usually a he. So now that the contractor has shut his phone, he's not responding to calls. Literally, they are stranded in multiple ways. They are stranded because they don't have any connection with the city. They don't have any social networks to tap into. And their only hope now is somehow something magically happens. Now, how will things happen magically? And as you raised about the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, there is nothing interesting in that promise, to be honest. There's nothing new, extra in that promise. Yes, there is rations that are double rations are available, but the double rations are available only for ration card holders. Now, most of the migrant workers that we're talking about, their ration cards are with their family back in the place where they belong to. So they are in a place where they don't have access to ration card. Their connection with the contractor is gone. So what do? Now, talking about the cash transfer program from the government, we've interacted with more than around 18,000, 19,000 workers right now. And what we see is about 20 of them have, of course, the number of women are fewer, but still a very, very generous estimate would be that 250 people have got money through the government. And most of those 250 people are also people who have got cash transfer program from Bihar government. So as far as Jan Dhan accounts go, there are about 20 or 25 people among all the people that we've spoken with have received that 500 rupees. And also we need to think of this, that 500 rupees a month is actually a pittance. What can we do with that 500? And just responding to your earlier question about pitting lives and lives, and that's exactly true, because it alludes to the question that was raised earlier, that a lot of people are dying out of COVID, but so are many others dying out of trauma. Like the example of Gangamma that Clifton mentioned, there are many such people who have committed suicide. The other day, there was this image of people coming out of a stone crusher. It's one of the biggest assault on dignity that I can think of in any lived history, so to say.
Both of you have been talking to workers on the ground. So what are the parts of this dignity? What did people forget they needed on the ground? There were a lot of people trying to give them food, trying to give them rations. But what was the shape of their needs? Clifton, maybe you can say, with your personal experiences on the ground and what people may have told you directly.
Actually, to be very honest, this past month and a half has been very, very distressing, because the number of phone calls that we've got from workers saying that they just don't have rations, that all they need is rations. If you imagine receiving, say, 200 calls a day, and I remember in the first week after the lockdown happened, we were getting, me and my colleagues in our organization, we used to get close to 200, 300 calls each from different sets of migrant workers in different parts of Karnataka. And the only thing that they were asking was, we don't have rations, we just don't have food to eat, what do we do? I think there are two things over there. The first thing is that, how does one even understand a state that takes a decision in such a way that the very basic need of a person, food, is not even taken into consideration? But I think that's one part. The second part for me, which was more important, is what workers told me. And they said, hum log apne haath kabhi bhi phaile nahi hai. See, we are workers. We've never extended our hand at all. And today, for me to even make this call to you and ask for food, you don't even know how bad it makes me feel. And I remember this conversation with this person distinctly, because I missed his call. I missed 4 or 5 of his calls, and I took a long time in calling him back. And then he said that, see, you don't think that I'm a beggar. I'm only calling you out of helplessness. And if you feel that, it's too much for you, I'm not going to disturb you anymore. But I also want to contrast it with a story that happened last night. Last night, in the middle of the night, we got a call from journalists telling us that an entire bunch of migrant workers, almost 500, 600 of them, were walking towards Majestic railway station, and that the police was lathi charging them. So 3 of us, we landed up over there, and by the time we reached, luckily the police had stopped the lathi charge, but was trying to shoo them away from there. And we asked the police, where do you expect these people to go? So we stopped it, we made them sit there, then senior police officials came, a lot of things happened over there. That's a different thing. But what one of those workers did was incredible. There's this organization called Mercy Mission, which landed up to give them food. And so we were distributing food to people. And this one person tells me, this worker says, Aapka khana nahi chahiye. I don't want your food. I am able to earn my living. I want to go home. That's all I want. And I think if you look at what the workers were saying then and what the workers are saying now, it's a complete breakdown of trust, a complete disillusionment with the state, a disillusionment with hope. All they want now is to get out of there. And I think you'll have probably heard this. As we speak, there are thousands of migrant workers who have walked 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers, 70 kilometers from around Bangalore. They've congregated in the Bangalore International Exhibition Center. I think that's what it's called, the BIEC, on Tumkur Road. And the only thing that they're saying is that we want to go back home. And these are workers, mind you, who have been terminated. There are workers we spoke to yesterday who have been thrown out of the rooms that they were rented out. There were workers we spoke to whose factories have been shut down, and the factory owner said, you please leave. These are workers who have foregone their wages. Workers who have said that, see, we have not been paid for the last 2 months, but we don't care. We just want to go back. And last, there's this image that has kind of stuck in my head, which yesterday in Surat, migrant workers took to the street saying that they want to get back. And there was then lathi charge on them. There was tear gas. There was stone pelting. Now, how do we even reconcile with the fact that here is a situation where the state takes a decision. It denies you access to livelihood. It denies you any kind of employment. It does not give you rations. It does not give you food. It compels you to rely upon some civil society organizations or trade unions. It makes you extend your hand, beg for food. And then when you want to go back home, you're going to face a lathi charge. Now, that is the reality of the migrant workers at this point in time. And these are the stories that we hear from them every single day.
It's remarkable what you say, because it actually reflects on the perception of the problem from, the police or the state government or the central government. It seems like what they behave like they're dealing with is actually a law and order problem rather than a problem of a humanitarian crisis or a crisis. I don't even think they're probably not seeing it as even a logistical problem, but as a law and order problem. Everywhere there are workers, there are lots of policemen ready to beat them for even wanting to go home, as you described. Raj, were states ill-equipped, or is this perception problem the issues? Or were states and the police ill-equipped to deal with this, but they're not foreseeing the problem? Why do we look at this chaos right now?
See, one of the things is the entire lockdown announcement. There was exactly 4 hours given to everyone to cope with it. Of course, there was no consultation with any civil society organizations or the workers. So the biggest stakeholder in this entire exercise are the workers, and they have been completely shunted out of this entire discussion. Now, consequently, the bureaucracy is also unprepared. So the field level bureaucracy, whether you're talking about the ASHA workers, you've seen many cases where the ASHA workers and even the frontline health workers, they have gone out and said that, look, our lives is at risk because we don't have adequate protective gear to deal with this. What this shows is the complete lack of any kind of dialogue, possibility of dialogue. So let alone the workers, even state governments were caught completely off guard here. So it's a situation that could have been averted, could have been dealt with much more sensitivity, could have been dealt with a lot more dignity to the workers. For example, there are people that we have spoken with who said that his wife, again, it's a desperate call in the middle of the night saying that, look, I don't have any money left. We don't have rations. I have a 3-month-old infant and my wife is not able to feed that infant because she hasn't been able to eat for 2 days. Now, if that's the kind of treatment we as a society, we as a government are giving the workers, then I think it's a complete shame on us. It's a cruel shame. And we have to really rethink and redo a lot of things now.
Even when help came in terms of relief packages and distribution of food belatedly from government, after several civil society organizations, charities on the ground had pointed out these gaps to them, even when that help came, it seemed like there was a lot of picking and choosing about which groups to give it to, which areas to cover. I myself, while trying to help some people, some migrant workers, and being in touch with them, saw that at least 100 people that I referred to, the government about, only 10 people finally got the rations after 2 weeks of discussing and going up to ministers level conversations. And they finally decided to give only 10 people, the rest of them were not considered eligible. So what is happening? Why are people not getting help even when money is set aside for them?
When it came to taking the decision, it was made. In understanding the consequences, it was there to see. But in remedying the situation, no state government or central government came forward. And speaking for Karnataka, I can say for a fact, because also this is a matter that we are arguing in the High Court. I represent the People's Union of Civil Liberties in a matter in regard to food security of migrant workers. In that, we had argued that, you have a situation where people don't have livelihood, they have no money, they need food to eat. So can rations be given to everyone, irrespective of whether you have a ration card, like Rajendran was just saying? But the state government outrightly refused to do it. And it took a lot of arguing, it took a lot of compelling for the state government to finally agree to, after the lockdown, to say that, okay, ration kits will be given to migrant workers. Because till then what they were saying was, we'll only give food packets. We were telling them that it's just not going to work, because you have camps and camps and camps of workers, thousands and lakhs of them, who are living in rooms you cannot reach with your food packets every day. And don't reduce people to beggars. See, mind you, the reason why we asked for rations is very simple. If I want a meal, if I want to cook food, I have to call up from once in the morning, once in the evening. The thing that it does to a person, if you're going to call up every single day for 2 meals, is just unacceptable. So we argued for rations. So finally, then the state government take the decision to give ration kits. Now then, to reach the ration kits to the families. I remember we had submitted a list of around 10,871 people, migrant workers from across Karnataka. These were the phone calls that we had got. And it took more than 2.5 weeks for them to get rations. And even in that, the ration kit that the policy mandated was for each person. what the officials would do, they would take a kit and say, okay, there are 8 people in your room, you take these 2 kits. Which means that something that could have lasted them for 20 days, a kit that can last you for 20 days, can only last this entire bunch of people for 3 to 4 days. So we saw that even in giving these ration kits, it almost was like a favor was being done to the people. And here, I think, I'd like to come back to what you were saying, Rohini. The entire thing that one is they looked at it as a law and order problem. The second thing, they looked at it as a logistical problem. The third thing, they actually felt like, why do we need to do this? Why do we need to give free food to everyone? And I think herein lies the crisis. This is a crisis of a democracy. How do you understand the people living in this country? How do you understand what their rights are? We can say fundamental right to food, right to life, all of those things. But does that consciousness actually exist in the political field or definitely in the bureaucracy? I have my doubts about this. I'll give you another example, of how at every step you actually undermine a person. Now, after much pressure, the central government has agreed that, okay, migrant workers can go back to their villages, to their home states. So in Karnataka, there were buses organized to take intrastate, that is, migrants from North Karnataka, to send them back to their villages. They charge them 140% of the normal wage. That's more than double of the normal wage. There were bus fares of almost 1,300 rupees to the northern districts of Karnataka. It's then our union and several other organizations, when they made a big hue and cry, the government finally, after 1.5 days, decided, okay, let the bus fare be free. That's good. Now, what happens to the interstate migrant workers? After much pressure, the central government says, okay, Shramik trains will be organized for them. But how do you get on the train? They have something called an online registration that happens. I mean, I can't even tell you how debilitating it has been for workers who do not know how to do online registration. So we actually shot a video on every step. You click over here. This is what a click means. And how do you then register? How do you upload a photo? And when you take a photo, most of us have HD. So it will be more than 1 MB. So you can't upload that photo. Now to get that worker who's sitting in a place where I can't reach, to change the settings so that he can take a photograph which is less than 1 MB and then upload it. It's a mammoth task. And this online registration presumes that A, everyone has a smartphone, B, everyone is well versed with it. So the point is that, whatever entitlement has been reached to migrant workers till now has been literally snatched out of the hands of the state. You've had to fight, you had to move the courts for it. And at all times, it is almost like the state is we're doing charity on its workers. And I think that's the biggest betrayal, I would imagine, that people feel.
That's a great fundamental question, actually, because having conversations with a lot of people, including, civil society, there is this question that keeps coming up again, the one that you raised. Why does the government need to foot this bill? This is an unprecedented situation. This is things I keep hearing from a lot of people from the middle class, that why should it be the government's responsibility alone, given that this is an unprecedented situation? Any government across the world, given this number of people, especially, migrant workers, would have been in the same position, and that it is the community groups or resident welfare associations and all of that should take the greater role in coming in and helping workers, that it should not be solely the government's responsibility. Raj, can you address that question? It's something that keeps coming up whenever I have conversations with people.
Before that, I think I'll just add one more thing. Another thing bizarre is that in order to get the cash transfer from Bihar, you have to take a selfie, and that selfie should match the photo that you have in your Aadhaar card. This is just the kind of thing that people have to go through. Now, coming back to your other question regarding why should the government? Now, the thing is, sure, I'm not saying the resident welfare associations or other civil society groups should just walk away and not do anything. But I think fundamentally, it's the responsibility of the government, because the decision of a lockdown was not taken by civil society. It was not done through any kind of consultation. That's one. So when people are given 4 hours notice, the central government better take responsibility for it. Number two is it's a statutory responsibility as well. Now, there are laws. Of course, Clifton is much better positioned to talk about the laws and the legality here. But there are Interstate Migrant Worker Act, there's a Disaster Management Act. Now, all of them, ultimately, it would mean that the contractors or the employers have a strict record of who the employees are in that particular group of people that they're working. And ultimately, it's the central government or the state government's responsibility to have an oversight on all their employers. So the record keeping of who is the interstate migrant in your town, who is the interstate migrant, who are the migrants from Bihar or Jharkhand that are working in Bangalore, the record keeping, ultimately the responsibility of it falls on the state government and the central government. But that has not been done. People are saying that so there is a provision that there is 31,000 crore announcement for construction workers. Now, how many people are registered in the construction workers, BOCW? Hardly any. So when you have so few people even registered, so ultimately the responsibility, the accountability, the buck stops with the government. So if the government cannot ensure the employers to pay their employees, then how can the government absolve itself of its responsibility? That's one. The second thing is, again, think about it this way, that in addition to all these legal frameworks that are there, on 29th of March, after, again, if you look at how the orders have been passed by the Ministry of Home Affairs, everything has been an afterthought. So on 29th of March, there is, after seeing that so many migrants are walking back home, then they issue an order that people should not be charging rent. The employers should pay their employees. Now, as we saw from all the people that we've spoken with, only 6% out of more than 17,000 people, their employers paid their full wages. So where will the laborers go? Their only hope is that ultimately the question of justice and dignity is a constitutional principle. It's incumbent on the state to deliver, but they have not. The other thing, important point connected here, is that the government very easily said that the employers should pay their employees. It's not urban migrant poor, but still it's critical to mention here is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, there the government is the employer. So during the lockdown period, it's incumbent on the government to pay all the NREGA workers, but that didn't happen. So this kind of double standards and hypocrisy is what is being exposed time and again through this. And even for this return journey, right, there have been so many confusing orders. 29th April, there was one order for return. 1st May, there was a different one. 3rd May, there was an even more confusing one. If you look at the text of the 3rd May order, you'll go spinning. You'll have no idea what to make of it. So how will workers who are stuck in some corner of some house, how will they even make sense of what these orders are? There's absolutely no transparency in it. There's absolutely no consultation in it. So I don't think it's fair for the government to just wash its hands away and say the workers have to pay for the travel. And again, at a time when none of the employers have paid their workers, it's the government's responsibility. And the bill is not too much when they can, if your rough back of the envelope calculation says it will be something like 4,500 crores or something.
Just 2 points I wanted to add. See, one thing is that who are these migrant workers? Now, let us look at Bangalore, right? Now, who are the migrant workers? Again, it's an invisible force. It was invisibilized till now. But now we know for a fact that Bangalore International Airport, the Kempegowda International Airport, is the entire workforce, more than 6,000 of them. Everyone is a migrant worker. Jharkhand, Bihar, West Bengal, Orissa, Uttar Pradesh. Around 10,000 metro workers, again, they're migrant. 40% of the 1.5 lakh workforce in the 7,000 licensed hotels in Bangalore are all migrant workers. 50% of the security guards are migrant workers. Migrant workers are everywhere in the city, and yet they were also nowhere. The only relation that they had to the city was the wage that they earned. The conditions that they lived in were appalling. And like Rajendran was saying, the labor laws that existed for them was only in violation. None of it was in compliance. So they never expected anything from the government. By the sheer hard work and despite the kind of oppressive working conditions and living conditions that they had, they were earning their living. And this thing is then dropped on them. When something like this happens, the responsibility is of the state. It's a constitutional democracy that we live in, where the state cannot just take a decision and wipe its hands off and say, it's not our problem. And also the crisis is so huge, it is not within the power of any civil society organization or resident welfare associations to actually sort this out. So if you were to look at pockets, for instance, Marathalli in itself will have probably few lakh of migrant workers. How is any civil society organization or any other body or trade union for that matter be able to reach out to all of them? So in that sense, it's not just the practicality. I think it's the principle of it. When you deny somebody their livelihood and you bring them on their knees, the least you can do is to ensure that they have some dignity, they have some food in their stomachs, that their shelter is protected, their wage is protected. Having not done that is something that is totally unacceptable.
Rohini, if I may just add one more thing. One of the things we are seeing is this one nation narrative, right? So that entirely is in question. Because on the one hand, what we are seeing is the host states, the richer states, for example, Maharashtra, Haryana, Karnataka, they are benefiting from the labor of the poorer states. But when it comes to footing the bill, the entire burden falls on the poorer states. For example, even when we are talking about the cash transfer, Jharkhand, Bihar, Bengal, Arunachal, Manipur, these are the states that have come up with any kind of cash transfer program seeking out their people who are stranded in different parts of the country. Now, this whole entire thing of othering, the us and them, this entire lockdown experience also reveals those fault lines, which the central government has, BJP in particular, they have tried to communalize things in different parts of the country. And this kind of a thing is making its presence felt here too. So what we are seeing is actually an attack on federalism as well. It's what some of us are trying to call as monopolizing decisions and socializing losses. And that's what we are seeing here.
Yesterday, when we were talking briefly, Clifton, you had also mentioned some of this where, given these extreme and shortage situations, there are some of the worst biases, even within migrant worker communities, even within government, that are coming to the fore. Can you talk about that again?
I mean, it's been quite interesting, some of these conversations, because, I mean, when we say migrant work, you don't see the person over there. So in a way, I feel, the challenge to the idea of our dear nation, it's playing itself out even over here. It's playing itself out in the minds and in the prejudices, even of these workers, these migrant workers who are facing such an assault of the state. And I think therein lies the magnitude of the challenge before us.
It's really disturbing what both of you have laid out. But it's important to know the different identity, the politics that is happening, not just party politics, but so much else. I thought that given that a lot of people are trying to return, I would like both of you to play bureaucrat or play politician, although we have just said how completely inadequate both have been. But given this situation where a lot of people are now being allowed to return, but there are two major concerns in this return. That is, one, who will pay for their return? That is a conversation that's coming up. And two, how to prevent the spread of the virus. And as they all crowd in stations and they're going to go home to rural areas where perhaps they have been free of coronavirus, but people going from cities may be taking it there. If you could take a moment to just play bureaucrat. Right now it is chaos. How would you have gone about doing this, causing the least damage and protecting the dignity of the people who are going back? Clifton, maybe you can.
Okay. Actually, after the Ministry of Home Affairs issued the order that migrant workers will be allowed back to their the villages or their hometowns, the Karnataka government came up with a SOP, standard operating procedure, on how this should be done. And we found that this entire thing of online and so we've actually written to the state government pointing out in how this thing can be done. Because the point is this, there's one thing that we need to understand, that workers want to go back. That there is, in my mind, I don't have a doubt. I mean, I've heard too many workers say that they don't care what happens. They just want to go back. And more often than not, single reason is that they just want to be with their families now. They feel that sense of loss too much. The two biggest hurdles at this point in time is, one, the lack of trains. Till now, I think 7,000 workers have been taken out of, Chikbanwara and Malur. These are the places where the trains have gone from. And 7,000 interstate migrant workers, I think one to Bhubaneswar, Ranchi and Patna. Hatia and Patna, these are where the trains have gone. There has to be, without a regular running of trains, and not just from Bangalore, from the major stations of Karnataka, unless you have trains going, there is no way that this can be done. That is number one. Secondly, the registration of workers is something that has to be simplified. It cannot be something that can only be done online. There are easy ways in which it can be done to ensure that every single worker can be registered. Thirdly is the question of the fare. Now, I'll put it out to you very bluntly. Pushed to a wall, workers will somehow get the money. They will call up their families and they will get money. 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees. And it will bring, it's going to be a crazy kind of load on them, but they will do that because they are so desperate to go back. But I think at least that much of responsibility the state must take. And all governments must take, preferably the central government must take, and ensure that no fares are charged of these workers. But all of this is only possible if there is one thing present, and that is basic respect for the choice of these workers. That, okay, you all have been in a bad time, you all have really been through hell through this last 45 days, but the government says, we are assuring you, we will ensure you go back to your villages. That statement has not come from anywhere. The only thing the workers know is that it is a challenge. So I would say, these are the 4 things that are absolutely essential. The last one, which I feel, is something that the governments have to ensure, is that there's no theft of wages. I mean, it's absolutely unfortunate that there are so many complaints of workers now who have not been paid their wages even for the last 2-3 months. The state will have to ensure that when a worker goes back, that worker doesn't feel robbed in the place that that person has built something. I think that may be something that the states must think about.
Raj, do you think that, would you agree? And also, I think there's some countries like maybe even Singapore that have said that they'll penalize employers for not paying wages to their workers. Do you think something like that will help? And about the return, if you had to play bureaucrat, how would you go about it?
Yeah, so I'll start with the invisible bureaucratic hat. Actually, we prepared a 14-point tentative plan for people on how to return to their home states. So some of the salient points are that, first of all, I think full autonomy should be provided to stranded workers in deciding their travel plans. And no one should be forced either to stay back or to return to their home states. Now, as Clifton said, when push comes to shove, if they want to go home, they will get money. And there are cases where the reverse remittance is happening. We've talked to people who said that हमारे पास पैसा नहीं था, तो हमने घर से पैसा मंगवाया है. So that has happened. So when push comes to shove, that will probably happen. Some of the workers may not be in a position to go back home immediately because they have borrowed money from the local kirana shop and other places, and they feel there is an obligation for them to return the money before they go back home. So that's also there. So full autonomy needs to be given. The second thing is, as far as the virus is concerned, there can be 3 stages of checking. So that's not a difficult thing: at the entry and during the transit and at the exit. The third very important thing is what we've seen is this kind of technocracy taking over everything. That, okay, we'll create an app, we'll create a website, and that's going to solve the crisis. Now, technology can be a means, it cannot be the end. And this is not new. It's the inertia of how this governance has been functioning for the last 6 years, that we create an app and we think that everything is fine. So here in particular, creating an app is not enough at all. So what needs to be done, one possible suggestion is every ward, make sure that all the public spaces in each ward are made accessible. So one can do some kind of an information dissemination through loudspeakers and autos and tell every resident of that ward that, look, these are the public spaces in this ward. This will be open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And there'll be government officials sitting there from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. We can have different counters for different states so that people, depending on whether they want to go to Jharkhand or Odisha, can go to the respective counter and do a physical registration there. And this need not only be government spaces. We should open up malls. After all, malls should be used for some purpose, no? So we should open up malls, we should open up marriage halls, we should open up schools, colleges, everything, and make sure there are sufficient officials sitting from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. to do this. And in addition to physical registration in each ward, a technology platform can come to an assistance for, let's say there is a person from Odisha who wants to go back. They can go to this particular booth or a counter in one such place in a public space in a ward. And the person sitting at the ward can then enter the basic details and give some kind of a token and give some kind of a timeline as to when their chance of return is going to come. So there has to be some kind of a systematic registration mechanism, and not just online, but physical registration mechanism. Now, goods trains, typically there are 50 coaches. We should not cut costs here by saying this train will also stop everywhere. Other than changing of engine drivers, there is no need for these trains to stop midway. So you can potentially have about 40 coaches, and each coach, a standard sleeper class, will have about 72 seats. In order to maintain physical distancing, you can have about 36 people in one coach. Make sure there's at least 2 medical teams, 2 coaches of medical teams, and 4 pantry cars in this train. So potentially in one train from, let's say, Bangalore to Ranchi, you can potentially have more than 1,500 people in that transit. And once you go to that, it should not be that, okay, our work is done once, let's say the train stops in Patna. No, there has to be a feeder train from Patna to different parts of Bihar, because many of the workers who are here, they're not from Patna or Ranchi. They are from smaller towns and villages. So make sure that feeder trains and transit trains from the capital city is also there. One more thing is there has to be some kind of a priority system for older people, women, people with disabilities. Some kind of a system of that can be arranged. It's really not rocket science, as they say. And these are some very minimal critical things. And as far as cost is concerned, there is no doubt in my head that the central government should foot the bill. And definitely, again, the burden should not be on the poorer states, because already they have been, what have the host states done? In terms of what has Karnataka or Maharashtra done, except for exploiting the labor that they have got? The least they can do is ensure a modicum of dignity, and the central government is primarily responsible for this. So the cost for this has to be borne by central government, because Indian Railways is a central government entity. And also another thing is group registration should happen, because typically what happens is labor, they are in a cluster. So they could be maybe 10 people in one cluster. So they cannot mandate that every person from that cluster should come. One person from that cluster should be able to register on behalf of 10 people. And don't put conditionalities. Don't say, give me your Aadhaar card, give me that card, give me this card. Let's remove conditionalities. Let's trust people for a change, because they've built our cities. So I think the least we can extend is a sense of trust. So I think no conditionalities, central government paying the bill, and open up multiple spaces in each ward for physical registration, not rely on apps because they are prone to errors and problems.
It's remarkable when both of you lay this out in such detail, and how granularly you've thought about this, how it does not seem impossible to have had a relatively smoother return, or even just dealing with the lockdown, people being in different places. We wouldn't have had to see solutions like reimbursement of tickets, or trains being the last resort, or all of these conditionalities that are imposed. It clearly shows that when government bodies are not listening to people in the know, this is the chaos that will ensue. Finally, just one last question, to which I hope you can give brief responses, is will the problem get over once the migrant workers go home? Will the crisis end? What are the issues do you think the governments should prepare for even once they are home? Raj?
So I think, no, it's not going to end so soon. It's going to linger for a long time. And the primary thing is the question of livelihoods, security, and a sense of belief and trust, whether it's staying back or moving to a new place. I think a sense of trust. What many might experience is the trauma has been so severe that many might actually be forced to come back because of lack of livelihood opportunities in their respective towns and villages. But again, what we are saying is, if that trauma continues, then we are creating a society which is going to be really traumatized and mentally unstable for a long time. And that's not healthy for a society. So that said, I think minimally what we need to do is, we have a very strong National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. This has been on ventilator over the last 6 years. So I think it's time to resuscitate it. It's time to strengthen it, relax the 100 days limit, make it open for the entire year. And also make sure the wages right now are, in many states, the NREGA wages are lower than what the state minimum wages are. So make sure that the wages are commensurate to what the state minimum wages are, at least. Also, don't put any limit. And simultaneously, I think this is a time for us to really rethink how we want the society and security of people is. So one of the things is also think of an urban employment program, a guarantee program, so that people are not forced to move to a new place. But if they move to a new place, it will be out of their own choice.
Iftin?
Actually, I'm really concerned for the future. I don't think that in terms of the economy, I don't think that this is going to go away very fast. This has hit our economy very, very badly. And I think it's going to take a few years for us to come out of this. What this would mean is increased unemployment. We already had a very high unemployment rate. This is just going to increase further. It's going to mean reduced purchasing power, which again then is going to hit the markets. So far as the working class is concerned, I think you're going to look at job loss. You're going to look at denial of wages. So basically an increased job and wage insecurity. We're also going to see much more evictions than we've seen before, because people are going to be unable to pay their rents. And that's something that's already happening. And this is primarily going to hit the lower sector of the working class who live, say, in Nelabadige slums, hutments taken on rent from landowners. Already there have been instances of their tenements being demolished. What we're also going to see is a labor law regime that is going to be dismantled by the central government, which it is already contemplating. So there is a plan to increase the working hours to at least to 9 hours, if not to 12 hours. There is a plan to introduce all the labor law reforms that we've been spoken of for the last 4 years in the form of ordinances, which in effect dismantling everything that the working class has secured, every right that they've secured through all these years. On the other hand, we're also going to see one very, very fundamental change in how in how society operates. So, every form of xenophobia that could have existed has played itself out in this pandemic. And that is going to increase, I would imagine, in the future. And that doesn't look good for us. I agree with what Rajendran said in most of the suggestions that he's made. I would only say that there are two things that this government, instead of going down that route, should actually do. Alongside NREJ, I think we need a full-fledged agrarian reform so that the farmers are protected. The number of farmers and the agricultural laborers who are committing suicide on a yearly basis is just incredible. It's in thousands and thousands and thousands. I think that needs to be done. And definitely, we need to look at a way of protecting our workers. If we don't do these two things, if we don't protect our farmers, we don't protect our workers, then I really... I'm doubtful about what we really want for our country.
Thank you so much, both of you. I mean, there are a lot more things I could ask you, but your last few comments have made it quite clear that the post-pandemic crisis will be much worse, where we will be dealing with chronic problems that get deepened and worsened because of this lockdown, because of pandemic, and the vulnerable people, their vulnerabilities have only deepened. And it's a matter of shame that we should be discussing this as this happens. This has already exploded. We have finally seen, the hard conditions that people are living in. But hopefully there will be people who are listening to you, taking your points and incorporating this into any policy that is coming up in the future. Thank you so much for your comments and your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Clifton. Yeah.
Thank you, Rohini. Rohini,
yes.
I actually forgot to say one thing.
Yeah.
No, I really feel, that like Ambedkar said, we need to develop a public conscience. And a public conscience means what? What Ambedkar says is a public conscience means one which becomes agitated at every wrong, no matter who the sufferer is. If we are able to do that, if we are able to emerge from this crisis, we really will be able to build ourselves as a community, as a society, as a nation, in keeping with our constitutional dreams. And that's something that I sincerely hope.
Yeah, I'm glad you added that.
Rohini, thank you so much for anchoring this vital discussion. Millions of Indian citizens cannot continue to face such an extreme abrogation of their basic rights and dignities. Clifton and Raj, thank you again for joining us on BIC Talks and making the time. Thank you. This episode of BIC Talks has Gaurav Krishna as our sound engineer, with support from Sarvana Raj, and the episode artwork was made by Chandni Venkataraman.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BIC Talks. You can get our podcasts on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in for new episodes every week. Check out Bangalore International Centre on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget to regularly check in on our podcasts.